Hello everyone, this is Seth here, and welcome back to Transcendent Philosophy. We have a special guest today.
Hello everybody, I'm Jacob, this atheist brother. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, probably better known as Mormons, and looking forward to being with you. We have a cool topic, one of my favorite movies.
Exactly. So, we were thinking of doing a movie review, and I asked Jake, what movie do you think is kind of philosophical that we can have a fun discussion about? And he had a great idea. He suggested The Giver. And so I thought, that would be a great idea. It's a very complex idea behind the plot, and we can kind of hit it from both perspectives, different political, religious perspectives, and have an interesting review of some of the deeper messages behind this movie.
Yeah, The Giver. It's all about a crazy post-apocalyptic society put together. It's a communist utopia, and they pull it off really well. That's kind of what really draws me in, because we hear a lot about this ideal to create, but in the movie they really show a really cool one. And so this boy Jonas is raised in a very strict and rigid society, built for just that, for equality.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So there's this interesting situation where in order to create this utopia, they have to basically numb down everyone's emotions by getting rid of love, getting rid of hate, getting rid of color, getting rid of basically differences. They hope to promote peace. If everyone's the same, and if everyone is, lukewarm, very mild, then there's going to be no fighting because no one's got the emotions required for conflict. And so they think that by taking away our humanity, they can preserve humanity. And it's a very questionable methodology for achieving world peace.
And they do it eloquently, beautifully in the movie. It's a really structured society. It seems to have worked quite well. They drug everybody. That's one way to do it.
Yeah.
And the question then comes up to the protagonist, Jonas. Is it right?
And so, one of the things that this society tries to do, in order to create this sustainable utopia, they have to implement all of these rules on top of the emotional suppression. And so, they've kind of deleted emotional words from their language. It's against the rules to talk about love. Say, replace love with some other word like, I enjoy your presence, stuff like that. And it's very dehumanizing, but because everyone is drugged, they don't realize what they've lost. They've never experienced love before. And so this pseudo-love is the best thing that they got, and they're content. And so controlling the language, controlling their clothing, they want everyone in uniforms, right? They control their education, and they control their career paths. Everything is kind of structured for them. They have daily medication that keeps them under control. They're taught to never lie and to obey the authorities, that the authorities are always right, and they have curfews. It's a very tightly controlled society, and nobody questions it because nobody has any humanity left to rebel against it.
Yeah, and hardly any need to when everything is so docile. It's kind of like the Garden of Eden, is a way to put it. Everybody in the society are little Adams and Eves, completely unaware of what's going on.
Yeah. And so you can see there's this immoral element to the structure, but the results are kind of good. And so there's this contrast between, are these ends justified by the means?
Which is a common area of concern when it comes to these utopias being built.
Yes, exactly. The ends justifies the means is a very dangerous philosophic mentality, which is where utopias go wrong all the time. All these attempts at communist utopias, they were willing to commit atrocities to get to that goal, because it's such a powerful goal.
Right. And it's natural to want that type of a goal. I get it. We were talking earlier today, I kind of feel, I have a wife and a daughter, and I am striving to build a little utopia in my home. It's a good thing to want. How crazy do you get to attain it, though?
Yes.
If you push too hard for it, to force it in.
Exactly.
In the movie, The Giver, they even take away the family aspect. I think that's an interesting route of, I guess, bypassing tribalism. So our little family units, we take priority in taking care of our own. But in this society, they can get rid of that. There's no last names. There's no...
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there's no, I guess, loyalty to anyone but the system.
Yeah, I often like to think of these things through like an evolutionary game theory lens, right? And so evolution, there's often a familial bias, a bias to your own genes, right? And this utopian project, it seems like they recognized the danger of evolution. Like evolution creates this tribalism, and the tribalism creates wars. And by breaking up the family, they think they're breaking up tribalism to promote peace.
Right. No more winners or losers.
Right.
That's another factor they try to really hold. The games, no winners, no losers.
Yeah.
No teams, no sides. They shut it all down.
Exactly. That's another part. That's another aspect of evolutionary psychology, which is the struggle between competitive strategies and cooperative strategies, right? And there's a lot to be said about migrating from competition to cooperation. You know what I mean? Competitive strategies that you could think of that as the tribal competition, whereas cooperation would be, instead of tribes fighting, tribes trading and working together, etc. And so you can kind of see their perspective of trying to suppress competition and push us towards cooperation. But you can also see there's a lot of dehumanization in that process.
There's not a lot to trade anymore. We got supplies. That's about all we got to us once you really, like you say, dehumanize.
Right.
I mean, no color, no dreams, no love or emotions hardly. You're talked down at if you act kind of uniquely, if you express yourself, if you have a strong personality in some way. They really try to make sameness priority.
Right. And I think there's some arguments to support a healthy type of competition, right? Perhaps the fear of competition can go too far. I think sports, there's often a healthy amount of rivalry, and there's a brotherhood, bond forming. I don't think competition necessarily has to go off the deep end. And so by going this participation trophy route, it seems to go overboard on suppressing the healthy aspect of human competition. Right. And so there was also another kind of very problematic aspect of this utopia was basically this emphasis on eugenics, right? In order to have the perfect society, they came to the conclusion that they need the perfect genes as well, right? They need the perfect culture combined with the perfect genes. And so they just wholeheartedly embraced, genetic engineering, get the healthiest, most obedient genes, and exclude anyone with the wrong genes from reproducing, controlling who reproduces and when, controlling the family structures.
On killing the kids that don't fit.
Yeah, even killing the kids that were not healthy enough, right?
People were too innocent, like Adam and Eve didn't even know what was going on while they did it.
Right.
Yeah.
It was kind of a systemic brainwashing. They had this concept of release, right? They were taught, this infant is unhealthy, we're going to release it.
To elsewhere.
Yeah.
That's the coin phrase.
And so they didn't understand that they were destroying a precious life. So they had their mentality was completely corrupted by this eugenics culture.
Right. So in order for all of this to be controlled and micromanaged properly, the elders, leaders of the society, needed to wipe out all the memories of good and evil, of biases. They needed to themselves become basically handicapped, become childish in a way. It's a weakness and a blessing, but it's necessary for everything to continue smoothly in the society. But that weakness led them to need a unique role. And that it's the name of the movie, is this unique role, the giver. So the giver is one that is exempt from the standards imposed on everyone else. The giver has the memories of the past, the horrors and the blessings and the joys that come with knowing good and evil. It's the one lone man in the movie who has taken the fruit of good and evil and has partaken.
Yeah.
And so they use him as a guide on the complex issues that are hard for them to manage, these ignorant elders. They go to him.
Yeah, that's a great point. Because in order to make decisions, you have to kind of have like this big picture perspective. You have to know the past in order to make good decisions for the future. But when they wipe out their memories, they don't know how to guide the community properly. And so that sets up the giver as a very important role in counseling the others. But I think one of the reasons that they wanted to control the memories so much is because they're afraid that if people have a memory of what it was like to have love, to have, all of the good things outside of the community, that would be a temptation to leave this utopia, right?
Right.
And to go back into the cycle of love turns to hate, hate turns to tribalism, tribalism turns to war. They were trying to end the cycle of violence, but that cycle of violence has this temptation of love, pleasure, color. Right. There's a lot of the good is attached to the bad, and that was the apple that was tempting the society, the forbidden fruit, and the elders were trying to keep the community away from the forbidden fruit.
Right. It's the only way to keep it all together.
Right.
So in the movie, the main character, the protagonist, Jonas, was chosen because every role is assigned to everybody. He was chosen specifically for some unique qualities he had, like everybody in society. He was chosen to be the next giver or receiver. It's kind of a transition of roles. There's a giver and a receiver. So he was the receiver of these memories and these traumas and these joys. And what qualified him, I think most interestingly, was what they coined the ability to see beyond. So this receiver, Jonas, was already starting to kind of break through the confines that were holding society down. He was starting to even see color. While medicated and everything. And with all the cameras and high-tech security this advanced civilization had, they were micromanaging and monitoring all these kids very tightly and caught on to this. And so with that in mind, they also noticed his extra courage, integrity, and intelligence. So these attributes kind of made him a wholesome pick that could handle the difficult challenge of holding on to all these memories alone. To not have anyone else that could really understand.
So, one of the things that these elders want is they want a very obedient giver, right? They want the person who has these memories to be very subservient to the system, right? But the weakness is those memories, they give you a taste of what's lacking. They give you a desire for what's outside the system. And so the giver has the knowledge of something better. And this receiver, he's receiving memories of something that seems better than the system of control that they have.
Rubs wrong with what they're living in, yeah.
Right. They're kind of trapped in a system where they can't actualize their full potential. And there's a little bit of frustration. It's like, how come no one else has this feeling of love? I'm the only one with it. There's a certain burden that nobody can reciprocate at your level. Right. But, the elders, they're trying to keep these givers and receivers under control, but they made a fatal error. Right? The giver, he has all this knowledge, this secret knowledge. Well, the giver, he knew that there was a receiver that was his daughter. In the past, before Jonas, there was a prior receiver. And this girl, she goes to get trained and to receive the memories from her father, but they're not allowed to have family relationships. So they treat each other like they're strangers.
And they were. He never got to raise her. He knows a family. He knows there's his daughter.
Yeah, so he had the burden of having this less than satisfying relationship with his daughter. And he was training her to be a receiver, but she broke. Right? The emotions, the possibilities, it was too much for her. And she basically rebelled from the system, right?
Very much so. She took on a specifically hard struggle that he underestimated, maybe because he's a male. He gave his daughter, who he didn't get to raise, the feeling of loss as a mother. A memory of a mother, but as if it was her losing a child. And it kind of cracked her. I'm sure the giver, the father, felt like the system she was raised in failed her to prepare for these emotions and feelings. Right. This darn utopia is part of the problem of why my daughter now not just failed, but committed suicide.
Yeah. So he lost his daughter because of this system. And I think what that caused within him was that increased his desire to sabotage the system.
So,
right. He realized that the system is corrupt enough that we need to break it up. And so when Jonas comes to him for training, he starts to set up a plan to kind of help guide Jonas to be the one to bring down the system.
Which is no easy feat. In order to undo the system that's been set up, they've created technology that holds these memories into one body, one person, or a giver and receiver in the meantime. And this boundary is built out of these giant towers surrounding the outer rim past the city. So it's about a 3-day journey is what he has to undertake to unleash all the memories he's received onto the community. So it's not all the memories, but it's enough to undo the system. And the plan was what the giver was kind of conspiring, because the giver knew he couldn't do this crazy journey, and somebody would need to help guide these poor, ignorant Adam and Eves as they walk into the land of woe and misery. When they finally awaken, they will need a lot of guidance from this wise old guy. So the plan was, and maybe we'll hold back the ending exactly, the plan is to see if Jonas can make it to escape this very strict and advanced society to begin with. Against their will, they're catching on to what they're planning. The elders are very much keen on keeping the memories suppressed into these two individuals.
Absolutely. Yeah, the elders, they've got security cameras everywhere. They're tracking his movements. They're interrogating his family. Yeah. They're like, what has he been doing lately? They caught him. He's starting to fall in love with his best friend.
Yeah.
They saw him kissing her, and he taught her to stop taking the medication. So she was starting to fall in love with him, and they kissed. And so he's like causing all this chaos in the community because he sees the value in these emotions. He sees the value of color, the value of love. And to him, it transcends the bad. Right?
But he's seen the bad too. He's starting to understand.
Right.
And he still votes for the good, even though he's seen the horrors of war, which none of us have really tasted as personally as he did.
Right. And he even asks his parents, he's like, do you love me? And they're like, you're not supposed to talk about emotions. Use precise language.
Precision of language, yeah.
And so he just feels so empty in this society, and he just wants to stir it up. But the problem is, they've got like a little military team. His best friend is a drone pilot. And as he's escaping, the elders send the drones to go hunt him down and order an extermination.
Yeah. And luckily, the friend was just wise enough to catch on that something was wrong. Something was amiss in how the world he lived in was running. Mm-hmm. And he felt it too. And he let his best friend go. He put his trust into his friend instead of into society. A little bit back to tribalism. He had a little taste of it. Yeah. And he latched onto it instead of the nothingness. Yeah. Sticking to nothingness just doesn't suit humanity. Is kind of another way to look at it. It didn't work. And so he gets to continue his journey. The military are off his back, thanks to his friend. Right. His friend faked his death, basically, with the drone pilot. Right.
Picked him up, threw him in the water, and said, we got him. But obviously, it wasn't enough to take him out. And so he was able to continue his journey to go past the boundary and upset the system and basically infect the entire system with his memories, right?
Right.
And what were they going to do to the girl, right?
Oh, at the very end, yeah. The girl, the one that he fell in love with and started to, I guess, convert to dark side.
He gave her a taste of the apple.
He did. She was an accomplice to helping him escape. Part of the drama of the movie was Jonas wanted to save the life of a newborn who was planned to be executed. So his girlfriend helped him steal, I guess, this baby, for lack of better terms, so that the baby would be executed the next day. And so he leaves with this baby, and his girlfriend's put in prison for it, and she then is put on to be executed or sent to elsewhere.
Yeah, exactly. So, basically, he succeeds in going past the boundary. He upsets the technological suppression system. His memories infect the society, and he's able to... It seems like he saved his girlfriend from an execution, because once that knowledge of good and evil came in, they would abhor the act of executing her. And so that it would reset everyone's morality and culture. And so he basically seemed like he succeeded in bringing down that system.
Right. And I guess the ending of the movie kind of leaves it in your hands. Were they right or were they wrong?
Exactly. That's kind of the philosophic question that we want to discuss.
Right.
Kind of this utopian approach, this utilitarian approach to society, and some of this evolutionary psychology. If you take a very strict evolutionary approach, does it necessitate these conclusions, or are there better conclusions that we can take from an evolutionary perspective?
So what exactly do you mean by an evolutionary psychology approach to a utopia? Or you don't quite follow.
Yeah, so what I mean is, if you take a perspective that you believe evolution is true, and then you say, I want to create a utopia, well, given this framework that we live in of evolution, maybe the utopian would say, maybe some aspects of evolution can help us get to the utopia, so we're going to promote those aspects, and maybe other aspects of evolution are harming utopia, so we suppress those aspects. And so in this giver example, tribalism, family bonding, love, these evolutionary traits we're suppressing because they hurt utopia. And then maybe this eugenics approach, picking the perfect genes, selection, they're boosting the eugenics approach because they think that aspect helps their utopia.
Interesting.
So, we are thinking about this movie, and we are kind of asking ourselves the question, what is the philosophic question behind this movie? What is the core debate, right?
Right.
And it seems like there's this dichotomy between the elders and the givers, right? The givers have one philosophy, the elders have another, and it's this clash of philosophies that is the core philosophic message of the movie.
Yeah, exactly. Which is the correct way to go about life? Do you control, suppress in the name of safety and security, or do you express and allow freedom to strive for happiness?
Yeah.
Strive for a good life.
Exactly. There's this, there's the risk, right? If you have all of your emotions, if you have all your freedom, there's a risk that you will get carried away and create a cycle of violence with all of your passion. Right?
Right.
So there's the risk, and there's the reward, right? There's the cost, which is violence, war, tribalism, cycle of hate. But there's the benefit, which is true love, which is connection, which is cooperation at different levels of analysis. And so, to me, I think you can reduce this debate to a simpler question. And the simpler question is this: does the existence of the good outweigh the existence of the bad? Right? Does the existence of love outweigh the existence of hate? Does the existence of connection outweigh the existence of conflict? And so, from the elders' perspective, no, it doesn't outweigh it. Like, all the good things about life are not as powerful as all the bad things. And so if the bad things are more powerful, then we want to suppress, bring it all close to zero, because the bad is too much. But conversely, if the good is better, the giver and the receiver, their philosophy is the good outweighs the bad, and so we want to promote more feelings. The more love, the better, because the love will outweigh the hate.
Right. They're converted, they're believers. They have faith and hope that in a better future they can produce one and do better than the nothingness that they live in.
In thinking about this question, it really presupposes some assumptions, right? It's presupposing, one, that there's a tight connection between good and evil, love and hate, right? They come together, but one is more. That's kind of being presupposed. And also, it seems like utilitarianism is being presupposed, right? The question is, it seems like both sides of this debate, they accept this utilitarian argument, which if the bad is more, then we don't do it. But if the good is more, then we do it. Like, both of them are doing a mathematical analysis, but they just have different mathematical calculations. The elders, they calculate the bad to be higher. The giver and the receiver, they calculate the good to be higher. Right?
Right.
And so, one of the really big problems with utilitarianism is, how do you even measure it? Right? Like, measurement is such a big problem. 7 billion people in the world. Can you measure if the suffering is less than the pleasure? Can you measure if the evil...
7 billion. I'm sure we all have our opinions.
Yeah.
Which one do you need?
Right. And so, I guess one question is, everyone should ask themselves, like, where do you get your opinion? Right? What do you think?
Where do we get our opinions at? I think we have to draw on our own perspective in life.
Mm-hmm.
What has life shown me?
Which creates a huge amount of bias. Right? If you come from a loving family, a loving culture, maybe a first world country, good education, good resources, good, economic situation, maybe you're going to have a biased perspective of the world. Like, you're going to have these rose-colored glasses. Everything is nice. Everything is good. I've never been sick. I've never been bullied. The good outweighs the bad, and the system should continue. Right?
Just pick yourself up by your bootstraps and you're good to go.
Right.
There's no reason to be bogged down.
But you could easily imagine someone with a different background, someone who's constantly bullied, poverty, malnourished, bad luck. Yeah, everything bad happens to them. And you could see they look into the world and, like, everyone hates me wherever I go, and I'm not fitting in, I'm lonely. And maybe we project our experience onto others. If I'm suffering, then there's a lot of people suffering. Or if I'm doing good, then a lot of people are doing good. And so that biases our calculation a lot, don't you think?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I don't think there's any way around it, though, is the problem. Until you really learn how to learn. We kind of run on a very barbaric system of you get what you get. As a kid, you learn that you have.
Right. But I think that statistics are probably a good way to kind of help us get that objective bird's eye view, right? We live in a day and age where we can kind of get these global statistics to try to get a little bit better perspective of what's going on. But even then, it's very subjective, right? Like, statistics can't tell you how bad pain is, right? Mm-hmm. Just going to the doctor. What's your pain level? Like, what a stupid question. What does a 5 mean? What does a 7 mean? Does anyone know? Can anyone get inside you? Oh, that's what a 7 is.
Right.
Yeah. So, this calculation, it has a lot of issues with it. I've thought a lot about this question in the past, and I think I came up with one way to measure it. And so, try to follow me into, like, the simulation theory thought experiment, right? Okay. Simulation theory, it's the idea that we all live in a video game, right? We are created by software. We have these experiences, but maybe within the simulation, there's an off switch, right? Maybe you can be like, oh, this character, I'll just turn them off. They're done, right?
You do that
just a very peaceful, easy exit. Yeah, people play video games, they exit all the time, right? And so the question is, if you could have a peaceful exit from the simulation, would you want that? Or do you want to stay in the game, right? And so I think, maybe I'm wrong, but I think that if you are willing to stay, that's evidence that the positive outweighs the negative, at least for you, right? And if you want to turn it off, maybe that's evidence that for you, the negative outweighs the positive. Does that seem coherent?
I think it's a fair assessment, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that it's complicated still to do the math of positive versus negative. I think you can live a pretty crappy life, and plenty of people do, but they have not necessarily good things happening in their life, but they have a good belief system of hope that they hold on to that hope, and it's kind of like outweighing the bad in their life. It keeps them wanting to stay in the game, like you say.
Totally.
Even though, if you do the math, everything present physically, at least, or in the world, is negative, but in their head, they hold on to this positive influence.
Well, I would almost want to argue that this utilitarian calculation, the internal is more important than the external, right? if you have a bad external environment, but if you've got all these happy chemicals going, you've just got a super resilient system, you can be happy in a horrible situation. That's a utilitarian, that's a good thing from a utilitarian perspective, you know what I mean? But conversely, if you're depressed, if you have all this negative, you could have the perfect life, but your head is producing all this negative energy, you're miserable. Utilitarian, lots of suffering, right?
Yeah, I think you're right. It outweighs your reality, your physical reality. We see it override all the time. Like you say, depression.
Right.
You've got these first world citizens, super strong, super safe environments, friendly setup,
right,
and they're still miserable to the point of committing suicide.
Right. So like someone who has a bad situation, if their brain can create all this hope, it's almost like the brain is creating positive feelings to help you endure the bad.
Right.
And so if you've got 5 points of suffering, but your brain produces 6 points of hope, you've got the energy to keep going. I'm going to stick around. I can endure it. I can get to somewhere better. And so I'm skeptical of the idea that you can just choose to have more hope. Like, I think some people struggle to have hope, and some people it's easier to have hope. Some people get happy emotions easily. Some people struggle to get happy emotions. Right. And so there's a little bit of a luck of the draw, but you can probably, if you make certain decisions, you can kind of boost it and play with it a little bit.
Yeah, every human, I'm sure, has a spectrum of I guess, direction they can, or area they can acquire. They can get better or worse to some degree.
Right.
Nobody's stagnant, stuck eternally in one little nook of misery or hopelessness.
Right. And so, going back to this fundamental debate of the movie, are the elders right, or are the giver and the receiver right? I think we could try to apply this globally, which is, if we look at all the people, if you give everyone all the love and all the hate, if you give them all the positive and all the negative, with all of that combined, do they want to continue the game, or do they want to exit the game? Right? If everyone is enjoying the game despite the negative, then what that means is the positive is justifying the negative.
On average, overall.
On average.
Right.
And so if you look at society, if the vast majority want to continue the game, then I think that's evidence that the good outweighs the bad, and
the elders are wrong.
So, yeah.
At least, and if we're having a vote on it as a national, as humanity, I think the vote should go towards the giver and receiver.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes. And, that's a great point. You bring up this democratic point. And in my blog, I've kind of gone over morality, and I think one of the fundamental aspects of morality is voluntarism. And you can think of voluntarism as basically the freedom to choose what's good for yourself, right? And so, I guess for this, the problem with this culture is they're not getting your consent. They're taking away your love and your passions without your consent, right? When you give someone the consent, the more proper way to do it would be the elders would ask you and say, Jacob, do you agree to suppress your emotions? We believe that by suppressing your emotions, you'll be happier. Do you agree, yes or no?
Interesting. No.
Right. And so if you give people the choice, I think that's a more ethical approach. And so part of their problem is they're forcing their belief system onto others. Whereas others would say, no, I don't believe your method makes the world a better place. I believe my method makes the world a better place.
Right. My vote is on the contrary. But maybe that's the issue, is they would get too many votes to the contrary.
Yeah. So the elders, they seem to be wrong if we measure it with this voluntarism approach. They seem to be wrong if people are wanting to continue the game, that means the game is justified. But maybe there's a good critique to that. Maybe you can let us know in the comments if you have a counter-argument or open to other ideas. But I think a really interesting philosophic problem, a philosophic thought experiment, it goes by the name the repugnant conclusion. I think it's very relevant here. And so I'm going to try to give a rough overview of this thought experiment, see what you think. So, in the repugnant conclusion, you're given this trolley problem. you're given the power to choose between two different possible worlds, right? Your job is to choose which world is a more morally correct world, right? If only one world can exist, which world should exist according to your intuitions, right? And so we've got these two possible worlds, and the difference between them is the number of people and the average happiness, okay? So on one world, it's kind of a utopia, which that's what ties it into the giver, right?
Okay.
Possible world like a utopia, or another possible world is kind of a dystopia. So let me flesh that out a little bit. In the utopia, we've got just a finite number of people. So maybe just 1 million people, right? The entire Earth, a hypothetical Earth or a hypothetical planet, 100,000 million people, finite number, but all of them are very happy. Average happiness, very high, right? Everyone's got healthcare, everyone has got food, everyone's got a big home. Average happiness high, quantity low. High quality, low quantity, right? Now the other planet has the opposite. Low in quality, but high in quantity. So they've got a near infinite number of people, right? But the planet is finite, so there's just not enough room for everyone. Everyone's crammed into homes like sardines. Like, average happiness is just barely above zero, right? And so everyone, it's like they're eating very bland food, no delicious food, like everyone's kind of arguing with each other, like happiness is just barely above zero. Like pain and pleasure almost equally balanced, slightly more pleasure, right?
Okay.
So the point of this thought experiment is to challenge utilitarianism, right? And because our intuitions guide us to the utopia. Like lots of people, all of these happy people, like what's wrong with like a utopia? Like,
that warms my heart to think about, yeah.
Religion invented the idea of heaven. That's heaven, utopia, a finite number of people, everything's perfect, right?
Right.
Like we lust for utopia in a way. And so our intuition guides us to finite utopia. But here's the contradiction. According to utilitarian mathematics, right? Utilitarian mathematics, we're supposed to add up the pleasure. Finite utopia is less pleasure than infinite mediocre happiness, right? An infinite quantity of mediocrity has a better mathematical accumulation than this finite heaven. And so if you are a true believer in utilitarianism, you are forced into the repugnant conclusion. You are forced to accept this meat and potato sardine human world where everyone's crammed in tight spaces. Because that's what maximizes the pleasure calculus.
According to philosophy.
Right.
Go there.
And so there's two questions here. The first question is utilitarianism wrong? Or do we need to, which conclusion is right?
Which planet, and then is the math done right to begin with?
And then how does that relate to the giver? So what do you think?
Well, I'm definitely a fan of the former planet.
Yeah, Utopia planet.
Utopia, it's hard not to crave that. We all kind of, at least to my understanding, we crave that utopia. It's natural to want to perfect and to grow and to achieve that level of quality.
Sure.
So wanting to snap my fingers and make that happen sounds really good, especially compared to a whole lot of mediocrity.
Right.
As far as the math, yeah, it's complicated. What are your thoughts on?
Yeah. So in my blog, I've tried to address different moral dilemmas, and I've come up with a perspective. Maybe some other philosopher has thought of this, but as far as I know, I've never heard it elsewhere. So basically, I call it exponentiated utilitarianism. And I think an exponential perspective on the math solves a lot of the dilemmas.
Okay.
And so basically what it is the extremes, right? There's pleasure and pain. Now, in linear mathematics, the problem with these utilitarian thought experiments is the mathematics is linear. A small amount of happiness, right? If you add up 10 pieces of small happiness, that equals 10 points, right? a 10-point individual is equal to 10 1-point individuals. Right?
Right.
So there's a 1-to-1 correlation in linear mathematics. If you convert it to exponential mathematics, if a person has 10 out of 10 happiness, that's not equivalent to 10 individuals with 1 happiness, because the exponent is applied to the happiness. 10 to the 10th power, right? If you apply itself as an exponent, 10 to the 10th power is an exponential amount of happiness. So an exponential amount of happiness, it's harder and harder. These infinite quantities, right? Before, only 10 mediocre people could mitigate one happy person.
Right.
But when one happy person, when they have an exponential happiness curve, it takes an exponential amount of people to equal one happy person.
Right.
And you can play with the exponent, right? You 10 to whatever power you want. You can play with the exponents, and what you can do is you can solve the dilemma. Because exponentiation, it accelerates towards infinity. So
Beautiful.
An infinite amount of people, maybe they can't satisfy an infinite amount of happiness, right? It reconciles the gap between two infinities.
Levels the playing field where it's an equal choice in a way now. And
right.
we tend to choose the better, happier infinite.
Right. And you could say that there's a million infinities, right? We've got a utopia. There's a million people on this utopia. That's a million infinities of happiness, right? And maybe that's an unrealistic thing to say. But we've got an exponentiation of happiness here that's not so easy to offset by mediocrity, right? Maybe this mediocrity, it's exponentially close to zero, right? Maybe 1 point of happiness is actually like 0.0000001 happinity. And so this accumulation argument isn't very strong when you stretch the gap between the numbers.
Right, kind of like infinity to infinity would be measured greater than 1 to the infinity. I think there's something about math like that. It would be on a lower level infinity versus a higher level infinity.
Yeah, I think there's arguments for comparing different infinities.
Right.
Okay, so with this exponential utilitarianism, I think we can justify this utopia world, right? But that presents us with a contradiction, right? Originally, we want to say the giver's utopia is incorrect, but with the repugnant conclusion, we want to say the utopia is correct. How can utopia be correct and incorrect at the same time?
Well, I guess what it would come to is the utopia we crave on that planet is meeting all of our desires, full capacity human, with completely filled with happiness.
There's no suppression of their happiness. This is a full unleashing of their happiness.
Human at 100% getting 100% happiness, whereas in the giver, they're curbed to an incomplete human with a capacity of 10 or of 1 being filled to that 1.
Yeah, exactly. So, I think part of it is this repugnant conclusion utopia. It's a bit magical. It's kind of, we're snapping it into existence. We're assuming that they have all this happiness. Maybe that's unrealistic. Maybe humans, lots of people in Hollywood, they get to the top of the top, get rich, have everyone wants to date them, and they're still miserable. So maybe that's a bad argument for what's realistic about humanity. The giver, it kind of taps into a slightly more realistic framework. But, like you said, they're suppressing it. Because they're suppressing the utopia, it's kind of a pseudo-utopia,
Right.
And that's kind of why we're against it. We're in favor of real utopias. We're not really in favor of pseudo-utopias.
Yeah. To be bound by chains.
Yeah. If you're forced into it, brainwashed into it, controlled, suppressed, deprived, it's not a full, satisfying utopia.
And that, granted, that is from two people who have, I guess, still hope in creating something better. I wonder if there's anyone out there, maybe those watching, listening, who wouldn't mind clicking a button and just moving to that utopia.
Yeah.
And taking a break in this chained up, kind of watered down version of life. Yeah.
If you're really struggling in life, the giver's utopia might look pretty ideal, pretty idyllic, Like their homes looked basically harmonious. There's not a lot of physical abuse, verbal abuse. Like They're not fully loving each other, but they're not hating on each other.
I still don't think it's something that would last, though.
Uh-huh.
You can enter that and hope and be reprieved by living in that way. But I think it's inevitable once you've had a taste of humanity, of having those passions, these desires, any hopes. I mean, in the movie, that his girlfriend, she just got a taste of passion, of reality, of emotions. And she knew right then and there that that's something she wanted to pursue.
Right.
I think you'll eventually want to come back.
Yeah. And there's another problematic aspect of this utopia, which is the suppression of their morality, right? Like, they were engaging in this eugenics project where they would kill the weak, right? Weak infants, weak elderly. Through lethal injection, they would get rid of the weak. And the giver and the receiver, their moral intuitions were screaming, right? Like, they had their humanity. They look at that like, what are you doing? You're destroying precious life. But because their emotions were suppressed, they were like robots. Like, oh, get rid of this life, get rid of that life. Like, there was a certain amount of atrocity that was created by this desensitization.
That's true. It's true. You can't avoid the nature of reality where there are things you have to address that aren't ideal. Even a utopia had to say, ooh, we gotta be serious about this, and we gotta kill these and get rid of that. These are hard things to do. You can't snap your fingers to get rid of all those experiences. Some of it, you have to become like a child or numb to it, even though they are atrocities you have to deal with.
I think part of my issue with this giver utopia is the suppression of morality makes it to where they do things that they would not do otherwise, right? If they were not suppressed, they would have access to a more full suite of moral emotions. And so they would say, oh, I abhor this eugenics approach. I don't want to be a part of this eugenics approach because my moral sentiments say, that's bad. Right? So if they were not suppressed, they would have the freedom to reject these policies. But because of the culture of control, they're suppressing everyone to get on board with this eugenics approach. And so they're suppressing them such that they are willing to do what they would not do otherwise. And you're manipulating people to violate their own conscience. That's kind of it's a moral violation that they're engaging in. Right?
Yeah, without ever being able to develop their conscience properly. They're, again, little Adam and Eve's, innocent, unaware, and willing to give that control through eugenics in the name of sameness to the elders. So there's no sickly, there's no funny-looking kid with a disabled arm or anything like that. Right.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to that fundamental question. From the perspective of the elders, each of these sickly children, the bad of their life outweighs the good, and therefore we should help them on their way to get released.
To elsewhere.
But the giver and the receiver, they have this faith that the good outweighs the bad. And so they want to keep them. They want to help them. They want to help these sickly progress.
Right. That life outrules the need for sameness. It just clashes, especially when, for them, I think that's part of it too, is they don't feel same at all. They're ostracized lone wolves out in the corner of society. And so, to them, it doesn't feel the same anyways. It doesn't feel like these kids are all that same. Very different. Yeah. The system isn't working for them. So a natural clash occurs.
Exactly. So, another fundamental question at the base of this movie is basically, is progress possible? There was this debate towards the end of the movie, the elder and the giver, they were going back and forth. The elder was like, we can't release the memories to the people because they'll go back to their tribalism, they'll go back to the cycle of violence, everything is going to go to hell in a handbasket once again, more world wars, more who knows what atrocity. That's hell. The only way to keep away from hell is to suppress everyone. Progress is not possible. We're just going to regress back to what we were, right? And the giver, he had faith in progress. He's like, yes, there's bad, but the good is what drives us. The love is what drives us. There's like, it's like a carrot. It's like, when we have this love, we create a vision of a better future, and we march towards it, and the bad is behind us, and the good is in front of us. And so, there's this hope that we can progress towards a better future, right? Maybe there is lots of injustice. Maybe there is lots of suffering. But if we have faith, if we work towards it, that passion will guide us to transforming the world to be better. That's the type of hope. It's like, having all of these emotions, having all this passion is justified if we can make things better. What do you think about that?
No, I think it's dead on. I think that's something we all kind of strive and struggle with ourselves. It's the carrot you described. What's our carrot in our heads? What's driving us?
Yeah.
Is it going to lead us somewhere good? Or are we aimlessly following other people's carrots, or we don't really have a strong purpose in life?
Oh, yeah. If you're just following, like, simple pleasure, like, oh, where's the best food? Oh, where's the best game? Where's the best, romantic interest? If you're just bouncing between aimless carrots, you don't have a transcendent narrative that's guiding you into the future. You lose an important amount of meaning, purpose, and hope, right? So, yeah, I totally agree that having that future-oriented carrot is important.
Right. And how do you end up like the elders suspect? If everyone's going to strive for the best food or the best water, the best resources, we're all going to kill each other trying to get them.
Right.
So
that's a great point.
We need to share and convert people to our carrots, or the giver's carrots. He had a good hope, and he believed he could share his carrot. It's a stupid reference. It works though.
Yeah.
He can share his carrot with all the people in the society once they eat the fruit of good and evil, essentially.
Right. Yeah, and there's kind of there's a concept of a meaning crisis where, in this modern age, it seems like religion is declining, and historically, it seemed like religion is this big carrot, right?
Sure.
There's this heaven that is your carrot, and if you do all the good things, you're aiming at this beautiful direction that gives you meaning, purpose, and happiness in life. But there's this argument that if you lose religion, you lose your carrot. And then you're like, oh, what do I do?
String just dangling there in an empty hole.
Exactly. And the argument is maybe atheism is unhealthy for people. Maybe we have a mental health crisis because people are losing their carrot. You know what I mean?
I think that's did they call that the meaning crisis?
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken. Yep. I'm a big fan of the meaning crisis. I think it's something to consider and study.
Yeah.
And I've seen some of what people will do to fill that hole and put a new carrot in there, and it's not always pretty. It's out of desperation. They quickly grab something that seems meaningful, and they can get hooked on that new thing for fear of the anxiety that comes if you lose that new thing.
Right. And one of the things about that carrot is that carrot is guiding you into your future. So basically, you want a wisely designed carrot. If you have a foolishly designed carrot, like if the newest ideology, some political ideology, political movement,
sure,
people can easily get swayed into these more superficial meaning and purposes.
I follow this person. I follow this team. I'm a Patriots. I'm a Trump fan. They go hard for this one more superficial, like you say, idea.
Right. And maybe that's not a deep enough purpose, and maybe it's not a well thought out purpose. If it's a shallow ideology, it's not robust enough to guide you through the suffering of life. You know what I mean? You need something a little bit more robust to take you through the challenge of life itself. Because most people are going to go through suffering. Suffering is hard to go through. Heaven is the biggest carrot there is. If you've got heaven waiting for you, it's like, okay, I'm just going to endure this suffering a little longer, and I'm going to get that fat carrot. Right? Evolutionarily, it makes perfect sense. Like, even from an atheist perspective, it's like, if we can deceive people to ignore their suffering, like, we're going to trick them to believe heaven, because that gets them to endure hell. This world is going to give you hell, but that carrot is going to make you endure.
Get you to the end of that path.
A lot of religious perspective is like, if you commit suicide, you lose the carrot. And like evolution wants you to survive and reproduce. If you commit suicide, you fail the game of evolution in a way. And so there's an evolutionary motive survive at all costs. You have to do this heaven thing. Get through it. Endure. Get tougher. Right?
Right. And good parameters. Typically, there's some basic form of morals attached to achieving that heaven. You can't be a scumbag to some degree. So, like you said, evolutionarily, it should love that big fat carrot.
Oh, yeah.
Even if you can't ever, in reality, achieve it. It's on a really far away stick. You just deceive. But at least you function really well. You're a strong racehorse with that carrot.
Exactly. And so I lost my faith in Mormonism almost 10 years ago. And so I've gone through this transition of faith to agnosticism to atheism. And so I've had to ponder this meaning crisis and be like, well, what am I aiming towards? I had to kind of rebuild a philosophic framework for my own life.
Philosophic carrot.
And that's not necessarily an easy thing to do. You know what I mean? And I think part of the problem, I think it's probably easier for atheists to be born without religion. If you're born in an atheist home, then your atheist parents can guide you to build your life with an atheist carrot. But if you're in a religious home and you lose your faith, nobody can teach you what the atheist carrot is. So you're like, and you're lost. And so I think people who lose their faith are in a tougher situation than people who didn't even grow up with the faith to begin with.
Yeah, I think a good analogy, sticking the carrot on the stick of the string, would be having had a great big fat carrot gives you a big wide string circle. And you need something equally wide. It's not easy to tighten that string. Something that might have to happen over time. Have less high standards for a carrot. It's hard to fill that hole if you had a big fat carrot in there. So if you were born with a tiny little string, you're starting to grow up, you're starting to gain complexity of thought.
If you're used to a little carrot,
you've never had that big
you never have a desire for a big carrot.
It doesn't, it's too big, it's extra, it feels, maybe, you could say.
But the religious people, they get this big, beautiful carrot. They're like, wait, you took away my carrot? Like, none of these atheist carrots are big enough and beautiful enough to match that. That was such a great carrot. Like, a glorious heaven, happiness with my family. In Mormonism, you could argue it's better than Christian heaven. Mormonism, you get to transcend to godhood. Right. You get to create worlds without number, populate them with your own spirit children. You get to have the ultimate, experience.
Probably the biggest carrot around. Yeah, I think you're right.
You get to be better than an angel. And so if you have this beautiful vision for your future, it's like, well, maybe the atheist carrot isn't cutting it at that point.
And I'm curious to hear what your thoughts on what kind of atheist carrots are out there. What size or what are they composed of anyway?
Yeah, that's a great question. When it comes to the atheist carrot, I've been influenced by Sam Harris a lot. I really embrace this well-being paradigm of morality, right? So the idea is that maximizing well-being is a good thing. That's the foundation of goodness itself. And I think there's a fair argument to say religion mirrors that perspective, which is the reason why heaven is so beautiful is because heaven represents maximum well-being. And so the idea of heaven is evidence that we think well-being is good. And so my argument is, we invented this idea of heaven as the ultimate utopia. And that's what we're aiming for, right? And the problem with heaven is it's unrealistic. And so people will sacrifice their entire lives for this heaven, right? They'll donate all their money to the church. They'll donate all their time to the church. They'll live where the church wants them to live. People devote everything to the church in a lot of cases. And sometimes that could be beneficial, but I think that there's a certain amount of the heaven perspective gives up on this life. It's because it's like, I don't care about well-being in this life because I care about well-being in the next life. And from the atheist perspective, that's a problem because this life is the real one. That's not the real one. And so you're trading real well-being for fake well-being. You know what I mean? And so the atheist perspective is, hey, we want to boost real well-being. Let's do it here and now. Let's fix the problems here and now. Let's not just focus on the future, right? The religious perspective, maybe they're like, well, we can't cure poverty. but we're going to convert the poor to religion, and then they'll have well-being in the next life. Or the atheist is like, well, forget about the conversion. Let's see if we can solve the problem. So instead of devoting all of your energy to the religious conversion, you're devoting all of your mental energy to actually fixing the well-being problems. And so I guess I think that you can fall in love with the carrot of well-being for everyone. Maximal well-being. So instead of falling in love with heavenly well-being for everyone, you fall in love with real well-being for everyone. And you can make that carrot even bigger. You can say, we're going to expand that well-being, not just now, but into the future. We're going to build more and more well-being that just keeps growing into the future. Every generation is going to get boosted and boosted. And so that well-being is just this real well-being is just expanding and expanding. And if you really love the idea of other people's well-being, then that becomes a beautiful carrot to you, right? Yeah. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things in life, is to be able to get happiness from other people's happiness, right? There's this word called confelicity. It's basically the opposite of sadism. It's the opposite of schadenfreude. It's the opposite of epicuricity. Confelicity is when you get happiness when others are happy. If you get a promotion at work, I'm happy for you. Like genuine happiness, right? Yeah. It's kind of the opposite of envy. It's like sometimes envious people, they're like, oh, he got a promotion. I'm jealous. I'm upset. When you're good, I'm unhappy.
What about me?
Right. I think that's a miserable mode of being. How sad would it be to lose happiness when other people are happy? Like, that's just a recipe for misery. Like, if you can be a confelicious person, if you can be the type that extracts happiness from other people's happiness, that's a feedback loop that's going to shoot you to utopia. If everyone is like, I make your life better, makes me happy. You make my life better, that makes you happy. Boom, boom, boom. You cycle that, you're going to build the best society there is. And so converting people to the love of real well-being, I think that creates the carrot that'll guide us. And you can, I think you can expand it to be equal to heaven. You know what I mean? Like, you're worried about the size gap between the atheist carrot and the heaven carrot. If you blow that up to future generations, you can have this big, fat carrot. All future generations of humanity are going to have a wonderful life because I am working to improve the culture. I'm working to make us wiser. I'm improving healthcare. I'm playing a part. I'm being a good person to help other people learn. Like, I'm infecting other people with confelicity. I'm trying to spread this upward cycle. You know what I mean? And the giver, they're afraid of the downward spiral. The downward cycle is like, I hit you, you hit me. I stab you, you stab me. And then my brother stabs your brother, and we got this tribal war, right? Bad can spiral to more bad. But I think the opposite is true, is good can spiral to more good. And so trying to be a part of that process. I think everyone, no matter what their ability is, it doesn't matter if you're smart or it doesn't matter if you have medical skills, like just being the confelicious person.
Were those contrasts smart or medical skills?
If you can just, in your role in life, you have the power to interact with lots of people around you. And if you are creating good relationships with people, you're creating a positive feedback loop. And the better you are doing at creating positive feedback loops, you're infecting society with a positive cycle. And so I think everyone can jump on board and say, I'm part of this process. This carrot is my carrot. I can boost the well-being because I'm a part of a network. We're all connected together. I can influence you, you can influence someone else, and we're boosting this network towards the goal. Right?
I think it's an impressive carrot you've built there. I think what comes to mind is, in summary, it's building heaven on earth.
Yeah.
You can conceptually create that idea of an eventual heaven, but how about getting your hands dirty now?
Right.
And we can do it here.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that idea. I look forward to working on that some more.
Yeah.
It's a cool idea.
We gotta work on it together.
Oh, yeah.
Going back to this fundamental question, do we have the ability to progress? Right? The giver thinks that progress is possible. The elders think progress is not possible. when I think about progress, I often think about the philosopher Peter Singer. And Peter Singer, he wrote a book, The Expanding Circle, where he builds this wonderful analogy. And what he's doing is he's articulating the flow of progress. And he's an atheist coming from a very evolutionary framework, but he builds a realistic paradigm of moral progress that is easy to latch onto. And so I think to flesh it out, it'll help build up the argument that progress is possible, right? And so what he basically says is that the history of humanity, or maybe the history of life itself, you could argue there's this trend from, how do I put this? There's the trend of selfishness towards selflessness. So there's a spectrum of selfishness to selflessness. And what's happening is we're reducing our selfishness by expanding the circle of what we care about. So if you only care about yourself, you have a very small circle. There's just one thing inside the circle. I care about myself, small circle. But then maybe you evolve, like a mother evolves to care about her infant. Right? Evolutionarily, if you don't care about your infant, you fail at the game of life. So evolution is guiding us to expand the circle.
Right.
So evolution is basically guiding chimps. You need to expand the circle. You need to love yourself and to love your infant. Now you got two things, right? And then it's like, well, fathers are kind of important. Maybe we should include fathers. So we love the children and the fathers. Fathers love the wife and the kids.
Right.
So you can expand the circle to the family. And then you can say, well, what about extended family? Like in ancient times, if you work together with like your extended family, you've got like a little clan. And that's like evolutionarily, that's more people, more defense, more strength. So humanity is like, hey, our little clan, that's better. So I'm going to expand my circle to where I love everyone in the clan, right? Not just my narrow family. I love my extended family. And that love, it's kind of like, it's a passion. It's like, I will suffer for you. I'll fight for you. I'll die for you. I'll work for you. I'll go hunt for you. It's like we're a team. We're in this together. Those are kind of beautiful emotions. But the problem is you have the love only for the circle. And then you get the tribal war thing. Where it's like, I love my tribe, but those guys, I don't love them. Screw them. We're going to go kill them. And so there's kind of this bipolar perspective. It's like, I love my circle. I hate everything outside the circle. And there's a evolutionary biologist, Robert Sapolsky. He articulates very well the effect of oxytocin on the brain. And oxytocin is you could almost call it the tribal chemical, the tribal neurotransmitter. When infants are born, the mother will get a dosage of oxytocin in her brain, and that's the bonding chemical. She's gonna, I think even the infant gives off the odor of oxytocin. She's breathing it in. She's creating this bond of tribal love with her child. It's like, I will do anything for you. It's mama bear love. Yeah, if someone is hurting you, I'm gonna go mama bear and protect you, right? It's a powerful emotion, this oxytocin. But the problem with oxytocin is all of that love for the infant gets converted into hate. Anyone who threatens this infant, all of that love flips upside down into my hate. The more love for the infant, the more hatred for the threat. And everyone outside of the circle is a threat. So boosted love, boosted hate. Robert Sapolsky builds that argument. And that is the fear of the elders in The Giver. The elders, they're like, oh my gosh, if we have love, we're going to have hate, and now we've got a tribal problem. But Peter Singer doesn't stop at tribes. That's the thing. The elders, they can't think past the tribe. They think that human love stops at the tribe. But I would argue that the history of religion is trying to inspire people to expand their circle outside of the tribe. You know what I mean? Like, preach to all the nations. Like, what do religious people call each other? Brother and sister. Yeah. What they're trying to say is, genes don't matter. We can be tribal members on ideology. So instead of tribe at the gene level, so now we can expand the circle. It's not just genes, we're expanding it to the ideology. The religious, if you join my ideology, You're a brother. I love you. So now we've got this bigger circle, and you're like, someone could not be my relative, but I treat them like gold. I'll sacrifice for them. I'll give them my resources. You're my brother, even though you're a foreigner, because we're in the ideological tribe.
Interesting.
Right?
So next level above tribalism.
Right. And so we're creating a bigger bubble of love. Right? But I think religion hints at even better love, which is universal brotherhood. The idea that we're all brothers and sisters, even outside ideology, right? If you can look at every human as a brother or sister, then you've completely transcended the circle. Every human is now in your circle. There's no one to wage war against if all of humanity is your circle. You know what I mean?
All but the elements.
Yeah. And so the trick is, for progress, if we're going to argue that progress is possible, we have to find a way to grow that circle. If you can grow that circle, we don't have to worry about tribalism anymore. Right?
Yeah. Very, very clean. Well put.
So there's another fundamental question that is built into this movie, or this book, which is it even a good idea to pursue a utopia in the first place, right? Jordan Peterson frequently makes an argument against utopian ideology. And he kind of alludes to the idea that it's like, utopia is a very difficult thing, right? Like, for example, solving poverty. It's a very complicated task. So building a utopia, it's more difficult than repairing a helicopter, for example. You're using Jordan Peterson's analogies. And from Jordan Peterson's perspective, the problem with utopian ideology is it's often naive. They think that there's this one thing that they need to do, and that'll bring the utopia. And so if a foolish person tries to repair a helicopter, they're just going to break it, make it worse. And the same thing, if a foolish person tries to build a utopia, they're going to do, they're going to ends justifies the means, make morally foolish atrocities. They're going to have a simplified principle that doesn't work, and they're going to fail and make society worse because they didn't have a wise approach to utopia. What do you think about that as a danger?
I think there's a lot of merit to it. There's a lot of people out there who think they have the answer. And I too have a version of the answer. I think there's steps to be taken before you could ever even hope to reach a true utopian level, heaven on earth, the world full of people at 100% happiness. To get there, I'd imagine you can run on the principles of Maslow's hierarchy of needs at a societal perspective. And so, to summarize how I interpret each level in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you have the physical element at the basis.
Right.
Next comes the social element. Then comes the intellectual element. And then comes the emotional element. And having all those brings you to the tip, the closing point. You've completed your pyramid, and once you have all of those, you have this utopia you're striving for.
Sure.
So, like you said, if you try to rush to get there, I think you automatically, at least in my perspective, opinion, you're destined to fail. Based on what we have technology-wise, everything-wise, we're not ready for a utopia of that magnitude.
Sure.
The best we could do would be get to the giver level utopia, a pseudo-utopia we could potentially build.
Right.
And I think we all, most people would agree that's not a long-term solution for anyone.
Or a good solution.
Yeah, if not a good solution.
Even if it is longer.
So back to Maslow's hierarchy, though. If you translate those scenario or those levels into specific conditions to be met with the society, I think once you meet certain parameters, you could get to a utopian society. First being the physical. If you can get your world, if humanity can grow to the point where we understand our biology, physics, and can become immortal, I think it takes that level where we're free of the need of, and maybe not truly immortal, but free of disease, illness, or need of resources.
Yeah.
Right.
That alone, that's like halfway to
yeah, you're very close.
Almost have a utopia at that point.
Right, but I think until then, you don't have a straight chance of it. And I'm talking pure 100% happiness, right? To achieve that, even a bunch of free resources, you're not going to be there.
Right.
Next comes unity at a low level, a social level of unity, where everyone gets to know each other and gets along. You have a lot of time on your hands now that you don't die at 80.
Yeah.
You can really become connected with your people, your humanity. Next step would be intellectual, to kind of become self-actualized in an intellectual way, understanding things for yourself, becoming a philosopher of sorts, becoming a medic of sorts, becoming a lawyer of sorts, having a diverse background will get you closer to that level of happiness. Kind of like unlocking levels, right? We can only attain so much happiness with our understanding. If you have a wider, broader stroke experience, you can absorb more and be more complete.
I really like that. Tell me, I'm going to try to simplify what you said. Tell me if you think it matches what you're saying.
Sure.
So maybe the error of these utopian ideologies is that they try to do a top-down forcing function to control things to be a utopia, whereas the Maslow's hierarchy approach is we need to go from the bottom up. We need to change the variables at the bottom and slowly build the utopia bottom up instead of top down.
Yeah, I think that's it. I never quite thought of it like that. That's probably exactly how it works.
Yeah.
Emotion is the last one I was kind of going to get to, is just experiencing love to the greatest degree. Mm-hmm. You can kind of visualize that pyramid. The more blocks you have, you might not have them all on the first foundation, but if you have enough, you can start putting some social blocks down on top of that, and you can keep filling in those physical blocks as you're building this utopia. But you do need to build from the ground up. So you have enough social blocks, you can get more intellectual blocks. And it's not like we're starting with zero. We have a lot of these blocks already in our society. We just need to finish the bottom so that we can finish the next level. You need all the bottom pieces before you can get the middle pieces, and then you can truly have that perfected love that a utopia craves and often has to castrate to achieve. It's not much love, but they like each other at least. We neutered them, we gave them these meds and numbed them up.
Right. Yeah, that's great.
The pure form, I think, is the ground up.
So, the wise approach to utopia. You have to respect the people, don't do the top-down, try a bottom-up approach.
Long process, buddy. I don't think we'll see something like that for a while. But I think that's the direction I'd love to see the world go. If we're going to make wellness a priority, if we direct ourselves properly with that carrot and hit from the ground up, we can get there.
Yeah, I think especially with AI, robotics, technology, genetic engineering, there's probably a lot of ways to kind of level things up in the next 100, 200 years.
Oh, for sure.
There's a lot of potential.
I mean, like you say, technology is key, I think. Like, you need those upper blocks to help you fill in the primary blocks. Right.
We're at a really fortuitous stage of history, right? In history, it was very hard to build a utopia, but we have such good technology that we're almost to the point where it's not as hard.
No, surely. Compared to history, we have it so stinking easy physically.
Yeah.
It's a joke.
Yeah, probably comparatively, we're already in the utopia.
From what they would imagine.
If the peasants from history were looking at our lifestyle, they'd go, that's the utopia!
I've seen heaven. Exactly.
All right, so in conclusion, I think we come to an agreement that the giver presents this idea of a pseudo-utopia, and the pseudo-utopia is not what we're aiming for. It takes away our humanity. It takes away the upper limits of happiness that are possible. It takes away growth and progress. And it doesn't give people proper consent. It takes away their freedom. And it kind of promotes a system of atrocities. And so, pseudo-utopia, lots of problems. But if we're wise, if we look to a ground-up approach, if we have the proper carrots of well-being for all into the future, if we expand our circle properly, I think a wise approach to utopia, that's a worthy pursuit. You agree?
100% agree. And it's well put. Stagnant is only so helpful. Being in a stagnant society, being in the stagnant pseudo-utopia, doesn't work. It's not a worthy cause, like a true utopia. A truly difficult utopia to create.
Yeah. But maybe the difficulty is going to be worth it. Right?
I would hope so.
But we got to make sure we don't we don't make the mistakes of other utopians who make things worse in the process.
Let's strive for 2 steps up, maybe 1 step down, and eventually get there instead of risking falling back into nuclear fallout and start back over.
Yeah. We've gotten so far with technology, it would be a pity if we self-destructed and had to restart. It's like now is a critical time to get things right. If we get it right, it's going to be smooth sailing for 1,000 years. If we get it wrong, we got to rebuild from the ashes. So, well, that was fun, Jake.
Hanging out with us. I'm happy to be on your channel.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
We'll have to have you back on again sometime.
For sure.
Take care.